Hello, and welcome to the December 2022 Folklore and Fiction podcast. My name is Kelly McCath-Morin. I'm a PhD candidate in the Folklore Department at Memorial University of Newfoundland, and I'm also a writer, poet, and musician under the pseudonym C.S. McCath. The Folklore and Fiction podcast and Dispatch synthesize these passions with a focus on folklore scholarship aimed at storytellers. You'll find the Folklore and Fiction archive along with the rest of my work online at folkloreandfiction.com. Interested listeners will find a link to the current dispatch in the show notes, where a more comprehensive record of this episode can be found, including a bibliography and other references. At the summer and winter solstices, I mimic the sun and pause to reflect on my own creative work. However, in this episode, guest contributor Rebecca Buchanan will pause and reflect in my place, with a return to June's discussion of pagan futurism via her short story, Histhani. Rebecca is the editor of the pagan literary e-zine Eternal Haunted Summer, and is a regular contributor to Evoke, Witchcraft, Paganism, Lifestyle. She has published 4 short story collections and 2 poetry collections, as well as numerous other novellas, short stories, and poems in every genre, from fairy tales to fantasy to horror to mystery to romance to science fiction. She has a master's degree in women's studies and religion from Claremont Graduate University, and a personal library that is threatening to outgrow her house. Rebecca has asked that I record her episode for you, because I have a studio and sound equipment for podcasting. So I'll be reading her excerpt of Histhani and her subsequent discussion. Afterward, I'll take the baton again for a few final words before closing. Let's get started. An excerpt from Histhani by Rebecca Buchanan. Note: humanity has moved out among the stars. Commanded by the goddess Sekhmet, and led by the priestess Marjani, one group of humans has dedicated themselves to saving the Histhani, a sentient felinoid species on the edge of extinction. The star of my home system has many names and many gods: Ra, Shapesh, Helios, Amaterasu no Mikami, Suna, Tonatiuh, Surya, and many, many more. Marjani drew a circle in the dirt with a slim wooden stick, dark red and streaked with yellow. The edges of her bright blue shawl dragged in the soil. She darted a glance at the small circle of Histhani who huddled in front of her. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the heavy gray clouds, barely illuminating the small clearing in which they sat. Her gaze rose to the naked, stunted trees which surrounded them. To hear the elders such as Shithan tell it, the trees had once been wrapped in thick layers of a papyrus-like bark that the ancient Histhani had used to create their art and build their homes. But that had been many generations ago. "Why so many names?" Hatanath demanded. His indigo eyes, too large for his face by human standards, were narrowed in confusion. The oversized, pointed ears that rose from the top of his head swiveled back and forth. "Gods?" Tahani interrupted. She scratched her nose with the tip of her black tail and peered at Marjani. "Like what Shithan talks about? The voices in the wind? And the dancers in the ground?" Marjani smiled at the kitlings. There were only 8 of them. Only 8 young. She felt her smile falter and forced it back into place. "So many names, Hatanath, because there are many gods who make their presence and blessings known through the sun. But on star charts, the sun is called Sol. It keeps things simple. And yes, Tahani, gods just like Shathan speaks of. It was a goddess, kin to those voices in the wind and dancers in the ground who brought us here." She drew 3 more circles in the dirt, much smaller than the central circle. She pointed at the 3rd one. "From here, this is our cradle world, the planet that gave birth to us." This episode of the Folklore and Fiction podcast is a preview, and you can listen to the full episode on the Folklore and Fiction website. Just click on the dispatch link in the show notes, or go to folkloreandfiction.com and sign up for a free account. Thanks very much for your interest. Copyright 2019 to 2023. Kelly S. McCath Morin. All rights reserved unless Creative Commons licensing is specifically applied.